Okay, good morning. Today we're going to talk about forecasting because forecasting is going to tie into our discussions yesterday of project management, and it bridges into our topic of tomorrow of product design. Project management, I've got to have a project management team to design my product. And I've got to forecast how many can I sell? Is the consumer willing to buy my product? So we're looking at that today. We're looking at forecasting. Forecasting impacts a lot of different areas of business. So it's critical to look at it and understand it. Because I see forecasts all the time. There's all kinds of forecasts about the stock market, forecast about the recessions, we forecast about the upcoming presidential elections, forecast about this or that. There's all kinds of forecasts. We're going to look at forecasting product demand, product sales. Here's one of the problems historically with forecasting. Historically, salespeople forecast here what they sell up here. And the reason for that is, historically, we have rewarded salespeople for exceeding forecast. That's great if you're a salesperson. And growing up, my dad was a pharmaceutical salesman, and he and all the 13 guys that worked for him every month, every quarter, every year got a bonus for exceeding forecast. I grew up thinking he was the greatest salesman in the world, and the folks working for him must be the greatest salesman in the world. And then when I finally started studying business and looked at forecasting, I asked my dad, I said, so Dad, explain this forecasting here, but selling up here thing. And he started laughing. He said, son, we got a bonus for exceeding forecast. So we habitually lowballed the forecast so we could get a bonus. We knew we could sell up here somewhere, so we forecasted down here. We rewarded, I think, the wrong behavior. So we encouraged them to lowball the forecast to get this bonus. We should reward them for hitting forecast. Because if the sales forecast is here, we're forecasting here, but we're selling up here. Now the problem is my production forecast is based upon this, but I got it produced for this. My inventory forecast is based upon this. I got to sell to this. I got to make to this. My facilities, my raw materials, even my people, how many people do I need working for this plant is based upon this, but now I'm up here. Now I've got to jump through my hoops to have more people, have more facilities. That doesn't just happen overnight. To have more materials, to have more finished goods. Even my profit is based upon this, and I'm selling up here now. And the problem with Wall Street is, if I forecast here, but actually have profit up here, for some reason Wall Street goes down. I don't know why. Probably because they realize that we lowballed our forecasts. I got to forecast products. What products do I need in the future? Long-term forecasting. This doesn't happen overnight. I got to forecast what products I need, how much of the product I need, and where I need the product, and when I need it. All kinds of impacts if my forecast is wrong. We're going to see when we talk about process design next week, and when we talk about the break-even point that goes with that, we're going to see I need to have a good forecast in order to make an educated decision about a break-even point. So all these things kind of tie together with forecasting, which means I've got to have a good forecast if I want to be successful. There's all kinds of forecasting models out there. We're going to look at some of them today and how they're used and how they're constructed. I want to give you some examples, and I got some examples listed in the slide deck. Some examples, I think, of bad forecasting. Not following good rules of forecasting. Look at the toilet paper shortage from the COVID-19 panic buying. Now, obviously, nobody could forecast that we were going to have this panic buying, because in past instances, like with SARS and the bird flu and a few other things, nobody panicked. News media did not create a panic back in those days, so we didn't panic buy. So I'm not sure that's really a good example of bad forecasting, or just an example of people creating an issue that maybe not wasn't there. Because if you look at the shelves today, there's toilet paper back on the shelves again. There's paper towels on the shelves again. About 5 years ago, like the rest of the sports world, the Chiefs went to a plastic bag to enter Arrowhead Stadium. So ladies, instead of carrying a purse, had to carry this plastic bag with them, which is somewhat of an invasion of privacy thing, but that's okay. People adopted to it. They adapted to it. But the problem was they didn't forecast the demand for these plastic bags. It's just a simple plastic bag with handles and the Chiefs logo on both sides. And they sent out a newsletter to all, or an email to all the season ticket holders saying they'll be available in the gift shop the first preseason game. They didn't forecast the demand very well, because it was the second regular season game of the year before they had enough of these plastic bags to provide them to the season ticket holders, much less to folks who wanted to buy one that weren't season ticket holders. If you look at one of the greatest examples, I think, in the last year of forecasting wrong, was the Popeyes chicken sandwich. It was there for about 2 weeks, then it was gone. Every Popeyes around had a sign. I got a picture of the sign in the slide deck saying we don't have it anymore. It took almost 6 months before it came back again. Now, I don't know if this was a forecasting mistake, or this was just a marketing ploy to get more people to want to buy this product. I don't know. But it looked like a forecasting error. Most going out of business sales, I think, are forecasting mistakes. Somebody either forecasted the wrong customers, the wrong products, the wrong cash flow, the wrong location. That's why they go out of business. Now, I know there's some going out of business sales where mom and dad had the business and their parents had the business, and then the kids are like, I grew up in the business, I don't want to do this anymore. But I think most going out of business sales is a forecasting error. And we're going to see this because Penny's just announced they're going to close like 80 stores. They're going to have going out of business sales at those stores, or store closing at those stores, because they have trouble forecasting the right product and the right customer base, and they have trouble positioning the firm the way they need to position it. There's some errors in forecasting. I got a bunch of them listed in the slide deck. I want to touch on a couple of them. Not understanding the customer base, I think, is critical. Not using reliable data, or not putting something unusual that happened into the calculation of the forecast to adjust the forecast. Remember, we talked about supply chain. Last week, we talked about the bullwhip effect. That fluctuation based upon bad flow of information. Well, we see the same thing come into play with forecasting. The better the passing of information is in my organization, the better my forecast is going to be. Otherwise, I had that bullwhip effect, creating all kinds of distortions and errors in the forecasting process. I got a couple of examples in the slide deck. I want to touch on a few of them. I think they're important to emphasize the importance of forecasting in business success. The first one that I've got listed is from Boeing, 1997. Now I realize 1997 is probably before the majority of y'all were born. So you're like, Joe, why are we using an example from before I was born? Because I want to bring it to modern day times and show you what Boeing did a few years ago. Very similar in nature. 1997, they wrote off $2.6 billion. That's not chump change. I know folks in DC think that's like walking around money. That's not chump change. If you were a Boeing investor, 1997, you were probably very upset because they just wrote this off. $2.7 billion loss that they wrote it off and they blamed it on raw material shortages and internal and supplier part shortages. Jump forward 2012, 13, 14, 15 timeframe, when they once again continued to delay the deliveries of the 787 Dreamliner. And the amazing thing to me was during that 3, 4, 5 year period of time when they were delaying the deliveries, they used the exact same excuse. Now, why are my suppliers short? Because I didn't convey information to them. And the bigger question is, why are my internal suppliers short? You mean I'm not even communicating within my own company? But I want to blame it on them because I didn't tell them what I needed. Apple did the same thing with the iPhone 10 when it came out. A month before the launch of the new iPhone 10, they passed new requirements for the glass, for the face of the phone, to the suppliers, and then blamed the suppliers for not having it when it came time to launch the phone. You've got to communicate with the suppliers if you want the suppliers to have the information and the materials available to you. I know Amazon's working on this artificial intelligence program. They're going to try to predict what I want before I want it, which is great because they can tell me what I need before I need it. That makes life so much easier. But if I don't communicate what it is I really want, I'm not sure how they can predict that I'm going to want it. Another example I want to use is the 2008 Daytona 500. Now, Daytona is like redneck Mecca. Every good redneck at some time in their life makes the pilgrimage to Daytona. It's the center of stock car racing. 2008, my family and I, and 250,000 of our closest friends gathered in Daytona for the 50th running of the Daytona 500. Now, we were there in 2006, because I'm a good redneck. We were there in 2006 as well. In 2006, there was an unusual cold front pass through before the race. Saturday morning, it was 80 degrees. We were on the beach, t-shirt, shorts, flip-flops. Saturday afternoon, cold front goes through, went from 80 degrees to 40 degrees in just a matter of hours. We went from t-shirt and shorts to hitting Kmart, Walmart, Target, everybody trying to find hoodies and gloves and hats and sweatpants. Strange change of events. Same kind of weather pattern passed through Florida in 2007 as well. 2008, they had a brand new sponsor, new official soft drink, Daytona 500. It was Coca-Cola and Coke Zero. Prior to that, it had been Pepsi, because Pepsi is also a North Carolina product, as is NASCAR, so it made for a good fit. Coke outbid them in 2008. They became the official sponsor, the official soft drink of Daytona. They used 2006, 2007 data to forecast soft drink sales for 2008. Now, apparently there is a correlation and a causation between temperature and soft drink consumption in the redneck world. There is no correlation between temperature and beer consumption. It's the same at a NASCAR race, whether it's 30 degrees, 90 degrees, makes no difference. Rednecks can drink beer in any kind of weather. But there apparently is a correlation and a causation with the soft drink consumption. Because a quarter of the way through the race in 2008, now I got to tell you, when they dropped the green flag at about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, it was 90 degrees. And a quarter of the way through the race, there were no soft drinks left in Daytona International Speedway. There's plenty of coffee, because they also used 2006, 2007 forecast for coffee. So me, I was good. I had coffee the entire race. Soft drinks, they were out. And you can't get, because of all the traffic and all the constraints, you can't get more soft drinks into that speedway in a short period of time. They were out of soft drinks a quarter of the way through the race. Not good forecasting. Empty shelves, another good example of forecasting wrong. I got some pictures in the slide deck of 2020 and Florida, both Walmart and Publix, the shelves after the first wave of pandemic buying. forecasting mistake. I also got some pictures from Lawrence for the same thing. Pandemic buying wiped out all kinds of stuff. Everybody wanted to blame the supply chain for it. I've also got a picture from Publix Price Chopper in Leavenworth from about 4 years ago. And you notice I got an empty spot in the shelf there because the shelves were empty and the product was out. But somebody forecasted wrong. Either Price Chopper forecasted what they were going to sell wrong, or the distribution center forecasted back to the supplier what they were going to do wrong, or the supplier forecasted the demand for the product. Somewhere, somebody in the supply chain forecasted wrong, so I got the empty spot on the shelves. So I've got what I call my principles of forecasting. There's 4 of them there. The first one is forecasts are usually wrong. Why are forecasts usually wrong? Because I'm trying to predict the future. What do my customer base want? When do they want it? Where do they want it? How much do they want? And customers buy at different rates. So we're looking at some tools today to try to minimize that wrongness or minimize that error, but forecasts are usually wrong. Every good forecast should have an estimate of error or margin of error. Think back to our discussions about confidence intervals. We had a margin of error, right? That piece we added or subtracted to my point estimate to give us a little more confidence in the data. A good forecast will have a margin of error attached to it. When you look at the polls for the upcoming elections, candidate A, X percentage, candidate B, X percentage. At the bottom says margin of error, plus or minus 5%. It's a 95% confidence interval. So it ties our confidence interval discussions to forecasting. Forecast should be more accurate for product families than for individual items. If I'm making Aloha shirts, my forecast for how many shirts I need to make this month, this quarter, this year, should be more accurate than how many to make that are gray with blue flowers on it, and how many I need to make that are mediums versus larges. So for the product family, it should be more accurate than for the individual item. And the forecast should be, not always, but it should be more accurate the closer I am to the forecasting period. The forecast for today's sales should be more accurate than the forecast for the 1st of August sales. The forecast for today's production should be more accurate than for the 1st of August production. I'll give you an example there. When I was a consultant, one of the companies I consulted for had 3 forecasting periods. The first one was 11 weeks out. Don't know why. Nobody knew why they forecasted 11 weeks. I'm sure if I could find somebody old that used to work for the company, at some point in time, that was the lead time for production. And they just never got rid of it. They've always done it that way, so they kept on doing it that way. At 11 weeks out, they were 59% accurate in their forecast. That's not very good. I'm pretty sure there's nobody watching this video today who'd be willing to take a 59% score for this class. That's an F in anybody's books. They had a 4-week forecast. Now, the 4-week forecast tied to when they had to tell the supplier, ship it. 4 weeks before the sale date. At 4 weeks, they were about 80% accurate. Not bad. They had a 1-week forecast. That was tied to when they had to tell the distribution center to ship it to the stores. At 1 week out, they were about 95% accurate. That's not bad at all. The closer they got to the sale date of the product, the more accurate their forecast got, as it should be. Some things to consider. Back to my example of Daytona, if something unusual happens, I want to record that. So when I look at the sales for next year, for 2021 for my products, I want to record the fact that we had 3 months of quarantine and people couldn't go out and buy what they wanted when they wanted it. That may impact my forecast for next year. I need to consider that. If I want to make a forecast for weekly sales, I want to capture weekly sales data. I don't want to capture monthly sales data divided by 4. I want to do daily sales forecast. I want to capture daily sales data. So when I'm forecasting Sunday sales, I'm using Sunday sales history, not Saturdays, because it may give me a different figure. If I don't forecast right, I may have too much product on the shelf or too little product on the shelf. I may have so much product on the shelf that it goes bad, it becomes obsolete. So I want to try to predict future events. That's what I'm doing in forecasting, trying to predict what my customers want, when they want it, where they want it, how much they want. So I'm looking at demand behavior over time. I'm making the assumption that demand behavior is going to change, is going to remain pretty constant over time. So it's qualitative, somebody's best guess, and it's quantitative techniques based upon numbers. We're going to look at some number techniques, some quantitative techniques today. Ways to look at calculating, forecasting what people are going to want. I've got several different things to look at. So I've got a trend line. Hopefully in my data, my product, I've got this trend line, and over time, demand for my product continues to rise. But we know from history, at some point in time, I hit a mature phase of my product, maybe a declining phase. I need to know where I'm at in that phase. I've got cycles, business cycles. Over time, I've got business cycles. I've got up cycles and down cycles. I need to know where I'm at in that business cycle. Because if I am in the midst of a recession, but I'm producing like I'm in the peak area, I have too much product. One of the things I think delayed the last recession, and hopefully we learn from that when we won't do it again, is people were producing up here, but they're selling down here. They had too much product on the shelf. They didn't know what to do with it. And until everybody ran out of product, nobody's buying new product. So I've got to keep that in mind as I'm doing my forecasting and my manufacturing. I got seasonal patterns. This is the kind of thing that keeps people up at night in the forecasting world. I get seasonal patterns. Sometimes they don't always show up at the same time. A seasonal pattern is kind of a period where I've got more demand for some spike. The demand for summer clothes is seasonal. If you look at the Olympics, every 4 years, there's a spike in the demand for skiing equipment, snowboarding equipment, ice skating. There's even demand this past Olympics for places to go curling and sweep the ice. Seasonal patterns. If I track those, I can make some adjustments to my forecast based upon the seasonal pattern. If you look at the sale of whole turkeys in this country, roughly 75% of all the whole turkeys sold in this country are sold during the fourth calendar quarter. You have Thanksgiving and Christmas and family holidays that people want to have turkeys, and the demand goes up. So I'm doing an annual demand. I can adjust my forecast for the fourth quarter based upon that seasonal factor. All I want you to know about the seasonal factor is it's just a relative frequency. How many did I sell in that period divided by total sales? That's all it really is. There's time series. Remember we talked about correlation and regression. Regression analysis is a time series forecasting tool. We're not going to go back to that. We're not going to revisit that. We've touched on it and we're done with it. There are statistical methods we're going to look at today. Simple moving average, weighted moving average, and exponential smoothing. 3 techniques that we can use to do some forecasting. We could throw in regression analysis if we wanted to, but we're not going to do that anymore. We've already touched on that. We've touched on the idea of using regression analysis in Excel to forecast what happens to one variable based upon changes in the other. And we talk about the model the guy in Australia came up with that helped them to forecast beer consumption based upon increase in temperature. There's also what's called the naive forecast. The naive forecast simply says whatever happened last period can happen this period. No calculation necessary. Works great for little mom and pop type stores. I sold 10 of these last month. I sold 10 the previous month. I'm going to sell 10 next month. Don't need a calculation. We're also going to see the naive forecast as part of the exponential smoothing technique. We'll talk about in just a second. So the first one's moving average. We're just finding an average, all we're doing. Nothing complicated here. We found the average, the arithmetic mean. We found that a couple of weeks ago. Same technique. People get a little concerned with this, throw the term moving in there. That just means we're moving down the data. Taking the demand for the number of periods we're looking at and divide it by the number of periods. So I got some data here in the slide deck. If you look at it, we've got data from January to October. If I want to use a 3-month moving average to forecast November, I need the 3 previous months. I'm always using previous periods data for forecasting. I do not need November's data to forecast November. I need the previous periods. It's a 3-month moving average. I need October, September, and August. I add together the demand for October, September, August. I add them together. I divide by 3. That gives me November's forecast. So if you look at the slide deck, I've got an example there. Come up with a moving average of 110. If I want to do a 5-month moving average, now I need October, September, August, July, and June. I add those 5 together. I divide by 5. It gives me a forecast of 91. Which is just a better forecast? I don't know. Not being flippant, I just don't know. I won't know which one is better for November until I get November's data in. I don't need November's data to forecast November, but I need November's data to get the forecasting error we'll talk about in a second. If I want to then move to December's forecast, the moving piece now is my 3 previous periods is going to be November, October, September. Add those 3 together, divide by 3. That gives me the December forecast. When I move to the next January, now my 3 previous periods, my moving is going to be, now my 3 periods is going to be December, November, October. So I just simply keep moving down. I'm always using previous periods forecast. Weighted moving average is a little more complicated, but still not really, really complicated, even people get concerned about it wrapped around the axle. I can use the weighted moving average to more closely reflect to data fluctuations. So I got like really strange data. Maybe I'm going to use the weighted moving average. There's not a one-size-fits-all best technique for forecasting. So if you look at the slide deck, I've got an example there of weighted moving average. I've assigned some weights. In a normal organization, almost every organization that I've dealt with that uses this technique, there's somebody sitting in a little room playing what-if games with Excel. So sometimes I think Excel is like video games for geeks, because you play all kinds of games with it. What if I change these factors? Will give me a more accurate forecast. So somebody at every organization's got a person who's sitting in a little room playing games, trying to find these weights. For y'all's purposes, I'm going to give you the weights. So you see the example here. We're looking at 3 months again. I've got August, September, October. I've assigned weights to them. My weights have to add up to 100, kind of like probabilities. And all I'm going to do is take the weight times the actual data. I'm going to sum those up, and that gives me the forecast. There's no division in weighted moving average. So if you look at what I've got there, I got the standard in my slide deck. I've got the standard formula everybody's got in every textbook on statistics and forecasting. Scratch that out, because I find it confusing. It's got all kinds of subscripts, superscripts, Greek symbology. Just scratch that out. All that thing is really telling you is I'm taking the weight times the actual and I'm adding them together. So I'm taking, in this case, 0.4 times 90 for October, 0.33 times 110 for September, and 0.27 times 130 for August, and I'm adding them together. I get 107.4. Brings me to an important teaching point with forecasting. With forecasting, I've always got to round up. I cannot sell 0.4 of an item. Now I realize the bag of chips I bought last week, coming back from the gym, opened it up, it looked like it was only 0.4 of a bag. That's why a little thing on the front said sold by weight, not by volume. May think it's a bigger bag, even though half of it is, or in this case, 6/10 of it was full of air. I can't sell 0.4 of an item. So I've got to always round up. The old rounding rules we learned in grade school, middle school, high school, 0.5 and above, round up, below 0.5, round down. Throw them out the window. For forecasting anything, if it had been 107.01, got to round it up. Any fraction at all in forecasting, you have to round up because you can't sell part of an item and you don't want to run out. So I round that 107.4 to 108. The moving piece is when I move to forecasting December, now my most recent is going to be November 0.4. Second most recent is going to be October 0.33. Third most recent is going to be September at 0.27. And the way I give it to you in the homework, the way I'll give it to you on quizzes or exams is going to be the same way. Most recent, the most recent period, second most recent, third most recent, maybe even fourth most recent. The most recent period is the previous period. I'm always using previous data, historical data. Forecasting uses historical data. Again, I don't need November's data to forecast November. I need November's data to forecast December. I need November's data to get the forecasting error for November, but I do not need November's data to forecast November. The moving piece is the weights just drop down. So let's look at that just to make sure it's clear. So I've got my data here. I've got so right now I've got this data here, 130, 110, and 90. Most recent, second most recent, third most recent. I add those together, I get the forecast for November. Now then, we'll throw some numbers in here for November. Now then, the moving piece here is, it's like to mind that I borrowed a dish rag. The moving piece here is, now then, when I do that, when I move to forecast December's forecast, now this is most recent, second most recent, third most recent. So as I move down periods, my weights move down with me. They stay in the same sequence. When I move to January, this becomes most recent, second most recent, third most recent. The third technique I want to look at today, it's a little more complicated, but I'm going to break it down into steps, just like we did with steps looking at probabilities and confidence intervals and standard deviation. I'm trying to break this down into steps. Again, back to my powerlifting math. Trying to make it as simple as possible with the thought process. It makes sense to me as a powerlifter. It should make sense to y'all as well. So the first thing I want you to do is you look at the slide deck, there's a formula there, scratch it out. That formula confuses me to pieces. Scratch it out, get rid of it. I'm gonna put in steps for you that I think hopefully make a little more sense. It's the exponential smoothing is the most commonly used technique in business today. One, because it looks complicated, so it keeps people out of forecasters' business. Forecasters are like statisticians. They want you to make you think it's very, very complicated, even if it's not. So keep people out of their business, but it reflects, I can adjust it to reflect the trend or the business cycle by adjusting the smoothing factor. The smoothing factor runs from 0 to 1. The closer my smoothing factor is to 0, the less reaction I'm putting on recent demand. The closer it is to 1, the more reaction I'm putting on recent demand. So I can, if I'm in a trend or if I'm in a business cycle, I can adjust my forecast by adjusting my smoothing factor based on what's going on in the world. So we got the same data again. There's 2 ways to look at starting exponential smoothing. One is I've got to have previous periods data. So we look at the data in the slide deck that we've been looking at all along. The first possible month I can forecast because of that is February. So I don't have any previous periods data for January. I got to swag that one. The first period I can forecast is February. Now the other option is I may decide to change horses in the middle of the stream. So maybe in May I've decided what I was doing wasn't working. So I'm going to start based upon what wasn't working. Starting in May, I'm going to change my forecasting technique. Wherever I start makes no difference. First possible period, or I tell you to start here. Wherever I tell you to start, the first period is going to be naive. So we look at the homework. I tell you, do these periods. Start with the first period I tell you to start with. The first period you forecast in exponential smoothing is always going to be naive. Whatever happened last period, it's going to happen this period. I'll try to break it down into 4 simple steps. When I first started teaching this, I don't know, 8, 9 years ago, I tried to use that formula, and it just didn't work for me. So I tried to take that formula and break it down into 4 usable steps. And I think if you use these steps, you'll find out it makes it very simple. In fact, if you use these 4 steps, I will tell you there's not an exponential smoothing problem I can give you that you can't solve. Step 1, first period only, naive forecast. Remember, naive says whatever happened last period is going to happen this period. Step 2, the smoothing factor times the previous period's actual sales, actual demand. And I'll give you the smoothing factor. Step 3, 1 minus the smoothing factor times the previous period's forecast. This is the only technique I know of where we're using previous periods forecast anywhere in the calculation. You have to smooth it out a little bit. Especially I got some forecasting error built in there. And then step 4, I add steps 2 and 3 together. That gives me the forecast. And I got to round up if necessary. I round in step 4, not in steps 2 or 3. If you use these 4 steps, trust me, there's not a technique or not a problem I can give you, exponential smoothing, you can't solve. It's like when we looked at confidence intervals. If you follow the steps, it takes you a few seconds longer, but it's going to guarantee you get to the right answer. So here's my data again in the slide deck. So keep on looking through the slide deck. I've got the data there again. We're going to walk through the forecasting technique for several months of data using these steps. So looking at our data, we've got the first period I can forecast is February because I need previous periods data. I have nothing prior to January. Brand new company. I had to swag January. First period I can forecast, step 1, first period only, naive forecast. When I look at that, that says in January, write this stuff up so we'll look at it. In January, it says I sold 120. February sold 90. Now then, using exponential smoothing technique, we got a smoothing factor of 0.4. You're shown with a little alpha there. So we know the first period we can forecast is February, which is the naive forecast, which says whatever happened last period happens this period. That's it. I'm through with February. The first period I forecast is always going to be the naive forecast. Whatever happened last period will happen this period. Now the next step I can do is steps 2 and 3. Step 2 says, when I move to March's forecast, step 2 says smoothing factor times previous actual. Well, my smoothing factor is 0.4. My previous actual is 90. Step 3 says, I guess I can make it work here. Okay. 1 minus the smoothing factor. Times previous forecast. Well, we know from the data, 1 minus 0.4 is 0.6. We know from the data my previous forecast was 120. And step 4 says add those two together. It gives me a forecast here of 108. There. Gives me a forecast of 108. Right? Now then, I keep on doing that. So if you look at the slide deck that I've got there, we'll walk through the rest of the months I've got laid out for you there. I always like to draw a line when I finish. In fact, when I do the homework key, when I do the exam key, I draw a line to make sure I'm using the right data. So I know when I get through here, I draw a line here under 108. That tells me I'm through with March. I'm always using the data right above the line. So it tells me when I get to April, I'm going to use the data above the line or the March data. So when I get to April, I'm going to take 1 minus the smoothing factor times the March sales of 100. Or excuse me, smoothing factor times the March sale, 0.4 times 100. Step 3, taking 1 minus the smoothing factor, 0.6 times this forecast of 108 that we just made. Step 4, I'm adding those together. I came up with 104.8, so I got to round to 105. Draw a line under April. I'm finished with April. I can move to May. Now with May, I've got the smoothing factor times the April actual of 75. Step 3, I've got 1 minus the smoothing factor, 0.6, times the forecast I just made of 105. When I add those together, I got a forecast for May of 93. I keep on doing using steps 2, 3, and 4 until I run out of data. Next thing I want to look at is called forecasting accuracy. Forecasting accuracy, I'm trying to find a technique that minimizes the forecasting error, which we know from Joe's rule number 1, forecasts are usually wrong. I want to find that technique, whether it's naive, exponential smoothing, weighted moving average, simple moving average, 3-month, 5-month, 6-month, 9-month. If you look at Investors Business Daily, they use a 210-day moving average of the stock market close to predict the next day's close. It's not a one-size-fits-all numbers or technique. So I want to find that method that minimizes my error. The smaller the error, more accurate the forecast. So we look at the homework. One of the questions, or 2 of the questions, looks at which gives the more accurate forecast. When I get the error, the smaller the error, the more accurate the forecast is going to be. So for our purposes, for this class, there's multiple ways of doing it. The simplest method to do it is actual minus forecast. So we look back at this. I've got actual 100 minus 108, actual minus forecast. I've got a forecasting error of 8. Here I've got actual minus forecast, an error of minus 30. The error can be positive or negative. But the smaller the error, the more accurate the forecast is. That's what I'm trying to figure out. Which technique gives me the more accurate forecast? Again, there's not a one-size-fits-all. So again, there's some little Bubette sitting in a room playing games. Can we change the smoothing factor? Will it make it more accurate? Can we change the weights? Will it make it more accurate? Will weighted moving average give me more accurate than exponential smoothing? Will 6-month give me more accurate than 3-month? Always trying to find that technique gives me a more accurate forecast. Most people have a tolerance, that margin of error they're willing to accept. If it's outside of that margin of error, now I've got to figure out, why is my forecast out of tolerance? What caused it to be out of tolerance? And there's all kinds of things. It be a change in a trend, So I'm in this nice upward trend. It's a nice nice to have kind of product. Remember several years ago the spinners. Everybody had to have the spinners to keep them from getting bored. So you had this demand pattern for the spinners. Demand was going up exponentially. Then some genius came up with the idea of let's make spinners with blades on the end of them. People start cutting the webbing in their hand. All of a sudden, almost overnight, the demand for spinners dropped off the face of the earth. I got to know where I'm at in the trend pattern. Where am I at in the business cycle? Am I down here, but I produce up here? That may cause my forecast to be out of whack. Weather changes create problems. When the weather turns cold in May, people get concerned. They go out and start buying hoodies and sweaters. When the weather turns real warm in January, it happened several years ago here, people started having sales for their hats and gloves and sweaters and scarves. So I got to make sure it's kind of back to my example with Daytona. I've got to make sure that I'm looking at what's happening in the weather. Does that impact my sales? And if so, I got to make sure I record that so I don't make the same mistake next year and miss it. Could be politics. That's my classic example. I use this to kind of wrap things up here. 2008, when President Obama got elected. It's like the second week of November. Then he starts leaking out projected patterns, projected policies they wanted to have. And he started announcing nominations for his cabinet. And they started talking about what they want to do. And one of the top agenda items was gun control. The redneck world went into a panic. I had dinner down at the Legends in December of 2008. I got talking to the guy beside me at the table who was there from Hays, Kansas. If you've ever driven to Hays, that's not a fun drive. I mean, once you get past Topeka, there's not much till you get to Junction City. Then once you get past Junction City, which isn't much to begin with, then you get to Salina, which not a whole lot there. And then you get to Hays. It's not a real fun drive. And this guy drove from Hays, Kansas to Cabela's in Kansas City to buy weapons and ammunition because he was afraid that when it come 20 January 2009, the first thing they were going to do was put in some strict gun control, and he was going to put him out of business as far as buying weapons and ammunition. In fact, because of that, Cabela's had their best quarter ever. 35-year-old company at the time, best quarter ever, history of the company. And you got to understand, weapons and ammunition is a very low margin item for Cabela's. They know you're going to buy that. They want to make the big money off of selling you scopes and cases and cleaning kits and hunting equipment and hunting gear. That's where the high markup is. Best quarter ever. Instead of looking at what caused this to happen. They're like, hey, look at us. Look at a good job we did. We'll use this fourth quarter data to forecast 2009 sales. Ooh. They tried all kinds of amazing things in 2009. Promotions, marketing campaigns, sales, ads, all kinds of stuff to try to meet that forecast. And they never did. And it was about halfway through the year before they sat down and said, wonder why we're not hitting our forecast. And they finally realized the forecast was based upon an anomaly in the fourth quarter of 2008. So I got to make sure I'm looking at all the factors that are feeding the sales of my product to factor those into the sales data so I can make accurate sales forecasts. So why do we forecast? It gives me a starting point. I know, based upon Joe's 4 principles, forecasts are usually wrong. Forecasts should have a margin of error attached to them, back to our discussions of confidence intervals. Forecasts should be more accurate, closer to the period of execution, and forecasts should be more accurate for product families than individual items. So they're going to be wrong, but it gives me a start point. I can then use those different techniques we looked at. Naive forecast, exponential smoothing, simple moving average, weighted moving average, to do a forecast and try to minimize the error. So look at moving average. Simply add together the data, divide by the number of periods. It gives me the forecast for the next period. Weighted moving average. Weight times actual. Add those together. That gives me the forecast for the next period. Always using next period's data. I don't need April's data to forecast April. I'm using a 3-month moving average or 3-month weighted moving average. I need the 3 previous periods. I need April's data to forecast May. I need April's data to find the forecasting error for April, but I do not need April's data to forecast April. I'm always using previous period's data. That's the reason I like to draw the line to know where I'm working. Always working above the line. We looked at exponential smoothing with the 4 steps. First period only, naive forecast. Step 2, from period 2 on. Smoothing factor times the previous actual. 0.4 times 90. Step 3, 1 minus the smoothing factor times the previous period's forecast. 0.6 times the previous period's forecast, 120. Add those 2 together in step 4. Round up if necessary. That's the forecast for that period. Move to the next period. And keep using steps 2, 3, and 4 till I run out of data. I'm very serious when I say, if you take those 4 simple steps and you write them down and you follow them, each problem that you do, there's no problem I can give you that you can't solve. We look at forecasting error. Simply actual minus forecast. 90 minus 120, 100 minus 108 here. Actual minus forecast. The smaller the error, the more accurate the forecast. As always, folks, it's nice to be nice. Be nice to people. Treat them the way you want to be treated. Stay positive. Stay focused. We're on the downhill slide for this semester now already. Stay focused. Stay engaged. Stay social. Just because we're still socially distancing doesn't mean we can't reach out to people and see how they're doing. Stay healthy. Stay well. Treat others the way you want to be treated, and this world will be a much better place. See you tomorrow.